People play games for a lot of different reasons. Some play for the challenge. Some play for the experience of stepping into the shoes of another, fantasy or otherwise. The last several years of streaming on Twitch has gifted me the experience of playing a wide variety of games. This is nothing new. I was always drawn to different types of games for a lot of different reasons. Showcasing them for an audience, however, has given new importance to the practice and made it all the more important for me to keep variety as a huge part of my life. I've been lucky enough to experience all kinds of games and try out different modes of operation within them that I may not necessarily have tried prior to becoming a streamer. I've even found some games that I wouldn't have expected to like based on their genre alone. But, for what it's worth, nothing really grabs my interest more than a good old-fashioned RPG narrative. A Plague Tale: Innocence really filled the shoes of what I was looking for, and at the precise time that I was looking for it. Developed by Asobo Studio, whose most credible work includes Ubisoft's The Crew and The Crew 2, A Plague Tale: Innocence released in the middle of 2018 under the blanket of Focus Home Interactive. It's a third-person perspective game with a gorgeously war-torn landscape and stealthy gameplay. Following the story of Amicia de Rune and her brother Hugo, A Plague Tale: Innocence takes its players on a narrative journey, escaping the Holy Inquisition and the spreading plague, both of which appear to be killing everything in their respective paths. The setting paints a grim landscape for the road that follows as Amicia and Hugo leave in search of a man named Dr. Laurentis at their mother's behest. When the game begins, you're out hunting with your father in what appears to be the basic combat tutorial. Learn to toss your sling in a number of different ways in order to create distractions, solve puzzles, and defend you and your brother. Combat is minimally challenging, though sometimes it can present itself as slightly more if, say, there's a horde of rats that you must cleverly navigate, or a lot of well-placed Inquisition members that you must stealthily take down. By and large, though, A Plague Tale: Innocence is a stealth game at heart with some puzzles involved, and some PvE combat in the form of either those pesky Inquisition soldiers that I just mentioned, or those peskier swarms of rats, the latter being the bigger issue. For the most part, you're controlling Amicia in this game, which means your main method of combat lies in the use of the slingshot. You can use this to either execute devastating and lethal blows to enemies, or you can get more creative and use it to distract opponents and make a cleaner, more stealthy getaway. We'll get into more about those choices later, though. As the game progresses, you'll pick up companions who you can lightly control by directing them to perform very specific tasks that are going to help you later down the road, and there's even a brief section where you play as Hugo with no real combat mechanism at your disposal. Mostly, though, Amicia is your main protagonist, and that's who you must step into the shoes of. I said in a review that I did for Vampire that I had issues with it at the start because the character was predetermined for me. I had to play as Jonathan, and there was no way around doing that. Therefore, I felt as though I had to play according to what I felt that he would do rather than the freedom to write my own destiny. Sometimes that can be negative in games, and while I overcame it in that game, in other games I can't really do that. This was not one of those games, though. It was clear from the start that I would be playing out the story of these two siblings in a predetermined story that they had written for me rather than writing out my own narrative and letting the chips fall where they may. I have no real preference for one experience over the other because in a really well-written story, I'll be able to immerse myself whether or not the shoes I'm putting on are mine or somebody else's. I found myself getting really attached to the relationship between Amicia and Hugo in A Plague Tale: Innocence, which made me that much more attached to the decisions that I made on how I defended my brother, or more importantly, how I behaved in the face of him. Admittedly, at the time of this review, it's been several months since I played the game, and my reactions aren't so fresh off the vine. However, reviewing some of the footage of my playthrough, I can recall how I felt while making some of these decisions, regardless of whether or not they were done for the stream reaction. There's a lot to be said about the concepts of ludonarrative dissonance in a game like A Plague Tale: Innocence, where you're given the open freedom to kill enemies at will, or simply sneak by them. And they really pin a lot of that weight in the decision on the existence of Hugo. Personally, these are concepts that I don't really think about all that often when I'm playing a game, although I have recently begun to replay the 2013 reboot of Tomb Raider, and while I'm having a blast, I can't help but make a mental note of how much killing Lara Croft has to do in her situation. Now, it's definitely out of a sense of survival in that case. There are no alternative options, and the game seemingly doesn't really make Lara feel the weight of all that killing as time goes on. That's an interesting concept, but again, these are things that don't personally bother me while I'm playing a video game. They are things worth noting for the sake of this review, though. You're free to kill as much as you want in A Plague Tale: Innocence, but Hugo's gonna see it, and Hugo is gonna respond appropriately. The best comparison this game has in terms of gameplay choices, narrative decisions, and all that good stuff, to me, is The Last of Us. You want to do what's right for Ellie, as you do for Hugo, but you also know, as both Joel and Amicia, that you have to survive, and that these enemies don't really care if you die or how horribly they make you die. Games with this kind of deep narrative are tasked with painting that kind of complex story because they make you think and they make you react accordingly. Some of them do a really excellent job of making you question that moral weight of your choices, and I think A Plague Tale: Innocence does it fairly well, personally. As I said before, the combat and the puzzles aren't too challenging most of the time. There are no options for difficulty settings that I can recall in this game either, so if you're looking for a brutally tough challenge over the story behind it, this game might not be for you. But if you're looking for a really great marriage of gameplay and story, add this one to your list. My only real complaint with this game lies in its ending, which, without spoiling, I personally fell a bit flat by comparison to the rest of the game. The long journey was fraught with so many twists and turns and emotional investments that, by the end, it just sort of seemed like they didn't quite know where to go with it. The final boss battle had a sense of grandiose to it, but in a confusing and hurried way that I felt missed a tonal mark to the rest of the game's story. In short, not bad, but not entirely great. I do recall a final cutscene after that did kind of tie it together in a nicer way, but I did want to bring up that, again, without spoiling, the end boss fight wasn't the greatest to me. All in all, there's a lot of heart involved in A Plague Tale: Innocence, and the still-beating epicenter of it is in that strong bond between Amicia and her brother Hugo. I think that makes this worth it alone. Playing out their journey was a memorable and enjoyable experience that I opened with welcome arms in an age where everything else feels like it's open world, multiplayer, and lacking that distinct personality that games like this have to offer. All in all, I thought it was a really great title. A Plague Tale: Innocence is available on PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Windows. One more thing, guys. If you like these review videos, please consider sending a pledge to the Patreon page. Patreon is the best way of supporting the content provided on this YouTube channel, and for as little as $2 a month, your contribution really does help keep the content rolling. That's patreon.com/skinteen. You can also check out my playthrough of A Plague Tale: Innocence on this YouTube channel. That was live streamed on Twitch back in 2018, but it's still pretty good and worth watching, I guess. I don't know. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.